Are you as sick and tired of the get out and vote commercials as I am?
And the big thing is November 3rd, get out and vote.
It seems like every time I get ready to watch a YouTube video, I get either Donald Trump or Joe Biden's face shoved onto my screen. I mean, seriously? I watch enough political content to be considered well-informed on the issue. That should mark me as a non-swing vote and grant me immunity from ads. Where are those Godzilla x Kong movie ads? But I guess my voice isn't as respected as I'd initially thought, and that is what today's video is all about. The issue for today, democracy. More specifically, how democracy fits into our system. Let's get started.
There you go again.
My name is Joe Biden. I'm a Democratic candidate for the United States Senate.
Basically, I'm here to announce that we're building Iron Man.
Here comes global warming! We did it, Vision!
We will make America great again.
The media and other forms of mass communications are always preaching about democracy. However, many people are quick to point out that our country isn't a democracy, but a republic. While a republic is a representative democracy, it stems around delivering power to individuals rather than groups. You would think that the idea of eliminating kings and queens from our country would have delivered power to the many instead of the few. Instead, just the opposite occurred. I actually agree with the system of government we have today. But to many, democracy tends to be less of a focal point than politicization and the strive for power. So what's the point of democracy then? Democracy must play a part in at least one of the three branches of government, right? Well, today we'll be going through all three branches of government and seeing where democracy fits into each one. To clarify, the government is broken up into three branches: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial branch. The legislative branch is responsible for representing individual communities within the United States and crafting federal laws. The executive branch is in charge of enforcing the federal laws made by Congress, with the president acting as commander-in-chief of the U.S. military and leading the country through national emergencies. The judicial branch is in charge of settling national-level disputes as well as interpreting the Constitution and exercising its power of judicial review to strike down unconstitutional laws. We'll be looking at each in detail. Starting out with the judicial branch. Quite honestly, there isn't much room for democracy here. For one thing, the Supreme Court upheld the constitutional right to vote in their 1944 decision of Smith versus Allwright. Quote, "The United States is a constitutional democracy. Its organic law grants to all citizens a right to participate in the choice of elected officials without restriction by any state because of race." So democracy is protected by the courts, but does the court utilize democracy in its process? No. Judges and judicial officers are appointed, not elected, so the public does not necessarily have a say in who the Supreme Court justices are. This is also true for every court that lies underneath the Supreme Court. This is to ensure that decisions made by federal judges are non-politicized. Federal judges don't answer to public opinion because their job is to make decisions regarding people's futures.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder.
Though it is true that the court is becoming a lot more politically oriented. There are two reasons for this. First of all, the courts have the power to interpret the Constitution of the United States. The Supreme Court affirmed that in one of their most famous cases, Marbury versus Madison. That means the Supreme Court is able to shift the political ideology of the U.S. by interpreting the Constitution in a specific way. For example, in Roe versus Wade, the Supreme Court interpreted the Fourth Amendment privacy rights to include a woman's right to have an abortion. That legalized abortion in all 50 states. This was recently reversed in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, but the idea is still the same. The issue of abortion is highly politicized and is handled in the judicial branch of government. Secondly, the courts are nominated on a partisan basis. This does not mean that they are politicized in a way that makes them corrupt. Rather, they are selected based on the way their leanings and ideologies mesh with the politicians nominating them. President Trump illustrated this when he promised to appoint conservative judges to the Supreme Court and was able to name 3: Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. That moved the number of conservative justices on the Supreme Court to 5, a majority. Together, these 5 conservative judges reversed the landmark decision of Roe v. Wade. Thus, there was a touch of democracy happening here. But then we remember that the United States was operating under a Democratic president at the time. Because the Supreme Court is a lifetime appointment, the court is pretty much stacked against the Democrats for years to come. So, it doesn't seem that democracy has much of a place in the judicial branch.
Your Honor, Jonathan Cumberland for the defense.
Unbelievable.
Next up, we have the executive branch of the government. The executive branch has a bit more democracy to it. Every 4 years, America has its biggest election and decides who will sit in the White House for the next 4-year term. The process is simple. People vote, the votes are tallied, and a winner is declared.
You gotta be kidding me.
If only it were that simple. You see, the process of electing the President of the United States is complicated and controversial. Yes, Americans in all 50 states and Washington, D.C. go to the polls, but they're not actually voting for the candidates themselves. Instead, they're voting for electors to represent them in the Electoral College. The Electoral College is the entity that then elects the president. Whichever candidate receives 270 electoral votes or more is the President of the United States. That seems somewhat democratic until you consider that the electors don't have to follow the majority opinion.
What?
Only 33 states and D.C. have laws that require electors to vote as they've pledged, which means that the popular vote doesn't necessarily matter in 17 states. However, over 95% of electors vote the way they said they were going to vote, and faithless electors have never changed the outcome of a presidential election. So that's not necessarily much of an issue. With that being said, our democratically elected president goes around and does exactly what he told voters he was going to do. Yeah, sure. Like that's what actually happens. In truth, presidents don't complete a majority of the campaign promises that they make. I'm still waiting on President Obama's Affordable Care Act to do exactly what he said it was going to do.
Who's that back there?
Even President Trump said that he was going to repeal and replace Obamacare, only to never find a way to do so. In fact, he recently posted the following on social media. Quote, "A president of the United States must have full immunity, without which it would be impossible for him or her to properly function. Any mistake, even if well-intended, would be met by certain indictment by the opposing party at term end. Even events that cross the line must fall under total immunity, or it will be years of trauma trying to determine good from bad. There must be certainty." While I will save the morality of this for another video, President Trump is right about the fact that presidents should care about their constituencies, but shouldn't be subject to impeachment because of people who disagree with them. The president is subject to public opinion, but once he is in office, he has a job to do. He has to be a leader and do what they believe is necessary for the country. Thus, democracy can't always be valued as it should be. On top of that, the president appoints his cabinet and a slew of other federal officials. These officials are not elected to their positions, and they have the full force of law behind them. They often end up judging Americans more often than any other branch of government. For example, all the nerds at the Internal Revenue Service are responsible for collecting taxes and driving Americans crazy on April 15th.
And this should make you a real crowd favorite. John works for the IRS. We've never had a contestant vote.
They are not elected, but their judgments have the backing of the law and the federal government behind them. Nobody wants to mess with them.
I'm crazy enough to take on Batman, but the IRS? No, thank you.
Honestly, the thought of democracy and taxes is hilarious when they come around. On top of that, the Federal Bureau of Investigations does not worry about public opinions when they make an arrest. I can just see what J. Edgar Hoover would have to have gone through if he'd been required to put every U.S. warrant up for a public vote. I'm sure criminals wouldn't see him coming.
Hi, I'm Scott.
Did he just say, "Hi, I'm Scott"?
The executive branch would be a complete and utter failure if it had to be run in a full democratic setting, so democracy can't have much bearing on the executive branch. That leaves us with the third and final branch of government, the legislative branch. The legislative branch of government is made up of 435 representatives, 1 from each of the congressional districts, and 100 senators, 2 from each state. Each is elected and represents their constituency with 100% accuracy. Obviously, the candidates are elected, but they are elected due to partisan means. One of the more well-known and fought against political strategies is gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is the partisan redrawing of districts in order to give a certain political party as many seats as possible within a certain state. What happens is that the state legislatures pack as many of their political opponents' supporters into as few districts as possible, thus ensuring more election wins and more congressional seats for their party. Arnold Schwarzenegger has spoken out against gerrymandering for decades. During his tenure as California governor in the early 2000s, he lobbied for an independent redistricting commission that attempted to eliminate the effects of gerrymandering in California. Unfortunately, not all states have independent redistricting committees, which means gerrymandering is still a legitimate issue that thwarts democracy. Additionally, since the only political names anyone ever pays attention to in the United States are the presidents and vice presidents, most people don't even know who their congressional representative is. Even worse, most of the people who do know don't know what their representative even stands for. They don't turn out at the polls. They don't care what's going on in their own neighborhood. They care about what Donald Trump and Joe Biden are doing, but don't care about those who actually represent them. It's really hard to say that democracy has any sort of existence in the legislative branch if nobody seems to care about Congress anyway. On top of that, the same logic that applies to the president also applies to Congress. Once members are elected by their constituencies, they can do whatever they would like as long as they don't disgrace themselves. Democracy does not play a vital role in the legislative branch either, which leaves us in a bind. Why would a democratic country like the United States not have a need for democracy in any of the 3 branches? Did we miss something here? Yes, actually we did.
How about that?
You see, unbeknownst to most of the country, there is actually an implied 4th branch of the federal government that is as powerful at driving policy as the other 3, the constituency. Think about it. Who nominates Supreme Court justices? An elected head of the executive branch. How is the president elected? By winning the most states in the Electoral College. Who do members of Congress represent? The people that voted for them in the last election. Democracy itself is an unofficial branch of government that checks all the others through accountability. Government officials must please their constituencies in order to achieve re-election. Yet at the same time, democracy itself is checked by being representative in nature. The fact that individuals, not majorities, are making decisions eliminates the dangers of democracy that the founders tried to prevent. The main concern about democracy is misinformation and deception of the people. Once rumors that aren't confirmed to be true are spread throughout the country, the results can be catastrophic.
The last time the youth got a good idea was eating Tide Pods, so no thanks.
That's what we've seen throughout the history of the mainstream media, and that's why the government is run by a limited number of people that have the responsibility to protect all of the top secret government information and make decisions based on it. So there you have it. Though democracy doesn't necessarily work within our 3 forms of government directly, it acts as our way to influence political agendas in this country. Our form of democracy truly is a representative form, and that's why it's lasted for so long. We have rights and voices that matter in the political arena, and the people we elect keep the country moving while we all live in peace. Hey, if you liked this video and want to utilize some of that democracy and free speech, leave a like and leave your comments down below. Until next time.